All right, let's just dive right into it. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly, deeply controversial topic. We're looking at the dietary claims presented in the best-selling book Chris Beats Cancer, as well as the intense medical debate that surrounds them. We're going to break down exactly how our everyday food choices might intersect with cancer cell growth, exploring both the radical claims made in the book and the grounded reality checks from medical experts.
So here's a pretty staggering question for you. Can the food we eat actually shrink, or on the flip side, feed cancer cells? I mean, it completely challenges how we think about the stuff sitting on our plates right now. We're going to explore this by looking at some specific case studies and scientific arguments that fundamentally rethink nutrition, chronic illness, and where we actually consider a healthy diet.
Here's the roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to start with the Stage 3C survivor who kind of kicked this all off. Look at what exactly feeds cancer cells, break down 5 specific foods to avoid, rethink our daily diets, and finally, try to find a realistic medical balance. Let's jump straight into Part 1, the Stage 3C survivor.
Picture this. You're just 26 years old and you get a devastating Stage 3C cancer diagnosis. That is exactly what happened to Chris Wark. But instead of going the traditional route with chemo and radiation, he made a highly controversial choice. He flat out refused them. Instead, he basically locked himself away and pored over 355 medical papers. And what he found led him to a complete, radical dietary transformation. We're talking a massive shift to a fully plant-based whole food lifestyle, which he completely credits for beating his cancer.
Moving right along to Part 2, what feeds cancer cells?
So dietary specialists like Dr. Suzuki have this really interesting perspective. They argue that cancer is essentially just a biological copying error in our cells. But here's the catch. For those rogue cells to actually multiply and become dangerous, they need very specific nutrients. The whole theory here is that our everyday diet either inadvertently hands those cells exactly what they need to thrive, or it starves them out and potentially shrinks them.
And we actually see this in practice with the pretty astonishing case of Mr. Yasuka. This guy was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given literally just 6 months to live. The standard treatments were causing severe side effects, so he made a massive pivot to a super strict diet. He started eating heaps of sticky, plant-based foods, specifically natto, every single day. Fast forward a year, they do a follow-up scan, and get this, his primary tumor had just vanished. Pretty wild, right?
Which brings us to Part 3, 5 foods to avoid. According to Dr. Suzuki and the book's research, there are 5 major categories of everyday foods that act like rocket fuel for cancer cells. We're talking red meat, poultry, processed meat, dairy, and refined sugar. Honestly, a lot of this is probably sitting in your fridge right now. So let's break down the actual biology of why these made the list.
First up, red meat. The issue here really comes down to 2 things, methionine and heme iron. Methionine is an amino acid that cancer cells apparently absolutely love to consume so they can grow. Then you have animal-based heme iron. Unlike plant-based iron, which your body regulates naturally, your body just keeps absorbing animal-based heme iron relentlessly. And that overload, it leads straight to severe cellular inflammation, which is a massive red flag and a known precursor to disease.
Now you might be thinking, okay, I'll just eat chicken. That's the safe, healthy option. I mean, it's literally the staple of almost every modern diet plan out there. But Dr. Suzuki points out a super surprising and honestly kind of alarming biological chain reaction that actually makes poultry even more of a concern under this specific dietary philosophy. Here's how it works step by step. Chicken is packed with an amino acid called choline. When you eat it, the bacteria in your gut gobble up that choline and spit out a byproduct called TMA. Your liver then steps in, absorbs that TMA, and converts it into TMAO. Why does that matter? Well, TMAO is heavily linked to arterial sclerosis and cancer. But here's a really fascinating twist. Long-term vegans actually completely lack the specific gut bacteria needed to make TMA in the first place. So if they had a rare piece of meat, it wouldn't even trigger this same toxic chain reaction.
Okay, moving on to processed meats. Think sausages, bacon, ham. The data here is pretty staggering. Eating just 50 grams a day hikes up your colon cancer risk by 18%. And just to put that into perspective, 50 grams is literally just 2.5 small sausages. It's nothing. And the real bad guy here isn't even the meat itself. It's the chemical preservatives like sodium nitrate. When those hit a hot frying pan, they convert into highly carcinogenic compounds called nitrocenes.
As for dairy, researchers lean heavily on the famous China study and some very specific animal testing focusing on casein, which is the primary protein in cow's milk. In one experiment, rats exposed to carcinogens were split into two groups. The rats given a 5% casein diet, they lived perfectly healthy, active lives for 2 years. But the group given a 20% casein diet experienced explosive tumor growth. Literally all of them died within 2 years. Researchers use this to argue that animal proteins act almost like an on switch for cancer cell growth.
And finally, we have refined sugar. Now, let's be super clear. Natural sugars in whole fruits and veggies are totally fine. They come bundled with essential minerals, vitamins, and fiber. But refined white sugar? That refining process completely strips away all the good stuff. And without those natural compounds, our bodies just can't safely process the sugar into energy. So instead, it becomes a direct, highly potent fuel source for those rapidly dividing cancer cells.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. Part 4, the dietary rethink. So, how do we actually apply this? Well, Chris Wark's recommended baseline is a massive departure from the standard Western diet. He advises that even if you're completely healthy and just looking to prevent disease, animal protein should make up absolutely no more than 10% of your total daily calories. That means a whopping 90% of your diet should come from whole, plant-based foods, and heavily processed options completely off the table. And if you are going to eat that 10% of animal protein, he strongly suggests reaching for fish instead of beef, pork, or chicken. Why? Because fish is packed with omega-3 fatty acids, which naturally have anti-inflammatory properties. But even then, he says you should really cap it at 3 times a week tops, just to make sure you aren't overwhelming your system with animal-based compounds.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Finding a Realistic Balance.
Let's do a quick reality check. How practical or even safe is it to just completely swear off chicken, milk, and sugar based on one book's claims? Survivor Shinsuke Kasai brings up a really crucial counter-perspective here. He warns that dropping standard medical care like chemotherapy for an extreme diet is incredibly risky. He points out that in a lot of these so-called miracle cases, patients actually use standard medicine first to shrink the tumors and then use diet to maintain their health. So it's really about balanced integration, not just jumping to dietary extremes on their own.
Plus, the medical professionals on the panel universally agreed on something else, the massive psychological toll of restricting your food. If you force a super strict, potentially joyless diet on yourself, and especially if you dictate those rules to unwilling family members, it creates a ton of domestic stress. And here's the ultimate irony. Chronic stress is widely recognized by doctors as a huge risk factor for cancer and immune suppression. You're basically trading one risk for another. To really drive this point home, there's a great anecdote from Dr. Nagayo, a veteran physician. He joked that back in his track club days, he'd drink up to 40 bottles of leftover school milk a day. Fast forward to today, he's nearing 68 and completely cancer-free. It's just a funny, powerful reminder that human biology is wildly complex. Genetics, environment, lifestyle, they all play a massive part. So while these dietary claims are incredibly compelling, they definitely shouldn't be treated as absolute, universal laws.
Well, I hope this explainer has given you a really solid, structured look into these dramatic claims. We've looked at the science against processed meats and dairy, but we've also heard the stark warnings about the dangers of extreme stress and avoiding standard medicine. It leaves us with a pretty important question to chew on. Moving forward, how will you rethink the food on your own plate to maximize your health without losing the simple, everyday joys of living?